This is Join Us in France, episode 291. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and on today's episode, Elyse and I talk about the places you have to go if you're a fan of high fashion or haute couture in Paris. Elyse gives us a brief overview of how haute couture got started in France and where you need to go visit next time you are in Paris. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/291. And if you're planning a trip to France, this site is chock full of great resources. You should check it out. Bonjour Elyse.
Bonjour Annie.
We are together again inside the house.
We are venturing to be together inside the house. There are a good 6 feet that separate us.
Yes,
but when you made me my coffee, there were less than that. So whatever.
For a minute.
We're being very audacious and brave here in France now.
Yes. Well, that's because things are calming down.
Things are calming down, and everybody's kind of hoping that this really is the end of it, at least for the immediate future.
Yeah, we're hoping. So today we are going to talk about les maisons de haute couture.
The whole idea of haute couture. Thank you very much, Annie.
Totally up my alley.
Totally up her alley. I will not even comment on that comment. It's totally up her alley. It's up her alley even more than mine, but never mind,
But it's very interesting because there's a lot to say about it, and there's also a lot to see with it, especially in Paris.
So
this is a good thing. If you're interested in fashion at all, I think it would be a shame if you didn't spend a little bit of time along Boulevard Saint-Honoré. C'est rue Saint-Honoré
it's
ou
rue
Boulevard?
Saint-Honoré.
C'est rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré.
Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré.
Ah, okay, all right. So it would be a shame not to spend a little time there. My friend Patricia has taken me there to see some of the high fashion boutiques. I would have never been by myself, but she said it was cool, and she was right. It is awesome.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and according, this is two confessions. I have never done this because I've never felt comfortable going into the boutiques, even though, in fact, the boutiques are the ready-made boutiques. That means the clothing there is, of course, high-end, but it's ready-made clothing. It's what the French call prêt-à-porter. And
but it's prêt-à-porter where a shirt will cost you $2,000.
Yeah. So, it's like, there are certain things I don't feel like being frustrated about, so... I will do it with jewelry, interesting enough, because I inherited from my mom a passion for looking at jewelry and appreciating the craft of beautiful high-end jewelry.
Yeah.
But I don't know. There's something about going into a store that has that kind of clothing, and I think of myself and I go, oh, God, no, never, never in a million years. But it is true that everyone in the world associates Paris and France with high fashion. Mm-hmm. With fashion in general, and there's a reason for it, and of course I can remember a few years ago I was teaching a class of French and European culture to foreign international students who mostly were from the Asian countries, and of course the course was in English, which is why I was the one that was teaching it. And when I asked them in an introductory class what they associated with France, the boys said, soccer.
Yeah.
And the girl said, fashion.
Yeah.
And that was that, and it was like, that was pretty much the extent of their idea of French culture anyway. A few of them went on to talk about perfume and food, but, but fashion is really associated with France. And of course, as you say, particularly with Paris.
Yeah.
And it has come down to us and what I didn't know in doing some research on this is that it is literally a label. That is, the Now, haute couture means high fashion. But I don't think the term in English does justice to what it actually means. Because, in fact, it was a term that was invented not even in the 19th century, but in the 1700s. Because the couture that they were talking about was for haute society.
I see.
High society.
Yes.
And it was for the aristocrats and for the nobility, and therefore it was high. You know, it was,
right.
In that sense, it was high. And then, of course, now we can say it's high because of the prices. Because that's really the only thing that decides whether you could afford it or not is whether you have the money.
There's more than one way to be high.
Oh no, let's not go there. That's another whole
just
subject
kidding,
completely. Okay. But for food and wine, we know that there's a label called an AOC.
Right.
And for fashion, and it was actually created and made official in 1945. So immediately after the end of World War II, it's called AJP.
And it stands for what?
AOC is
Appellation
d'origine
contrôlée.
So this is appellation. What is the J now? Appellation de. I don't know. We have to look up the J.
Okay, just a sec.
So it's a label. It's a label that was created in 1945, and it was and as you're looking it up, this is the term in. I like this term in French. There's the term cahier de charge, which means this is the list of requirements for any house of fashion or any label to be officially part of the world of haute couture.
Yeah.
Anyway, so these are the requirements if you are a designer and you want to have your label or your fashion house be listed as one of the ones that belong to haute couture. These are the things you have to have, which is why there are fewer and fewer in the world today, actually. You have to have every piece of work that's done by hand. You have to have 2 in-house ateliers where you have mostly women, but not only women, who do the sewing of everything, including every little bead that's put on a piece of fabric, every hem, every stitch everywhere. Everything has to be custom made and custom fitted. And this is something that goes back to a while ago, but it's interesting to know. One of the other requirements is that you must have 2 shows a year.
Oh.
Or what the French call un défilé.
Yeah.
Which is the walk. What do you call it? The showroom walk. You know, when you see the
I know what you mean, but I don't know
the
what you call
models go down the runway and come back up again. You must have 2 a year. And this is why it is so important, because in Paris, and of course now there is also one in New York, there is Fashion Week. There's Fashion Week in the fall, and then there's another Fashion Week in the spring. And those 2 Fashion Weeks coincide with this idea of 2 shows a year where you show your collection for the next season. And you must have in each of these shows 25 new creations.
Okay.
So all of these things are basic bottom line requirements.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have a group of people who are already the people who run the major fashion houses, who actually have a little bit of say about whether or not they think you are up to standards. But this is where I love the stuff that comes in. So trying to figure out, where did this all start? Well, it all started with Louis XIV and Versailles.
Wow, that's a long time ago.
A long time ago.
Yeah.
It started actually, really, in the 1770s. And it started to be really called that in the 1770s. Louis XIV actually was earlier than that, and went on into Louis XV with Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry, who were the 2 mistresses who introduced high fashion. And high fashion, now nobody can see us, but I'm going to make you laugh, I think. The Marie Antoinette had what they called a chicken nest on her head.
A chicken nest on her head.
They called it a poule, actually. And it was this ridiculous wig thing that went up about 2 feet high off of top of her head, and it was very fashionable for a while. Well, it started actually under Louis XV and one of his mistresses who created this fashion, because all of the men and women at the time wore these horrible wigs, and they needed to do something to vary it. I guess they were starting to get bored by the fact that they were just powdering their heads all the time anyway, probably to keep the fleas away or whatever, but... Yeah. Anyway, they started these extreme styles, but it really did begin under Louis XIV. And what is interesting is that at that time, so this is the beginning of the 1700s, every major aristocratic family in Europe came to Paris to buy their clothes. The Russians, the English, the Spanish, who of course still hated the French anyway, the Italians, the German, Prussians, whatever, everybody.
Even the Italians, huh?
They weren't really Italians. They were the House of Savoy and the House of this and the House of Parma.
Right.
But now, of course, we do think of fashion and style in the second half of the 20th century, very much also connected to Italy.
Yeah.
But that was certainly not the case at the time. Huh. What's fascinating to know is that, and this reminds me of the whole thing that about the history of the department stores, is that because all of these aristocrats and nobles, obviously mostly women, came escorted with an entourage to Paris so that they could buy the latest fashion and buy certain fabrics to have their clothes made, because they had to copy whatever the latest thing was introduced in the court of Versailles. They developed hotels for them. And these places that were high-end, luxurious places for all of these aristocrats to stay. So some of what we see when we go around the places that now still are associated with high fashion and everything actually are there because of that. It really had a lot to do. It's interesting because the reputation of France as being a country of sophistication and culture and, of course, art and music and things like that really also went over into the idea of clothing and fashion, and particularly, mostly for women and, of course, young children, but men too. Even though the majority of it was really designed for women, because of course women didn't, especially the upper classes, they didn't have much to do with themselves except to get dressed up. They played cards, they played musical instruments, they went to balls.
That would be a boring life, I think.
Look at what Marie Antoinette did. She went and built this farm on the grounds of the Versailles because she was so bored with just having to sit around and pay attention to the rules and regulations, But under Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, I'm sure because you've heard this on other podcasts that Annie and I have done, or that Annie has done, that Marie Antoinette was this very unhappy young woman who was married off to the King of France and basically was bored to tears. Now, whether she had a great intelligence and would have done anything else, who knows? But anyway, what happened was she became very, very involved and interested in fashion. And she heard about this young woman named Rose Bertin, who was introduced to her by a duchess. And this Bertin had arrived in Paris at the age of 16 to apprentice as a stylist with a woman named Antoinette, whose house of fashion was on Rue de Faubourg de Saint-Honoré. This is how it all began on that street. And by the time she was 21, she had opened her own fashion house. Number one, it was unheard of to do it at that age. Number two, she was apparently such a good businesswoman that she ran it without having any sponsorship of men of any kind. And her fashion sense was so good that when she was introduced to Marie Antoinette, that of course meant she was introduced to all the ladies of the court, she became the person to go to for fashion. And there are beautiful portraits of her. I looked up a couple of them yesterday on internet. She was very interesting, very lovely kind of looking woman. At the age of 23 in 1770, she opened a boutique called Le Grand Mogul, M-O-G-O-L. Why Mogul? I have no idea. And she became such a successful businesswoman and stylist that she had 30 employees and 120 suppliers.
Wow, that's pretty successful, yeah.
Cloth, leather, she made shoes, she made hats, she made dresses. And she was called by Marie Antoinette my fashion minister.
Aha. Wow.
And she managed her entire life, apparently never married. I think from what I can gather, because she did not want to be under the control of a man, she ran an extremely successful business. She managed to avoid being persecuted by the revolution because she did manage to get to England, unlike Marie Antoinette.
Yeah.
And when she came back to Paris, she actually she managed to keep her house of fashion going for a couple of years. And then whatever her taste or styles were, they basically changed with the time. And so she lived to a relatively old age, but no longer was the person to go to for fashion. But she was basically the one that they started using that term, that this was high fashion and that women could be part of the world of fashion. So of course, that always interests me, the idea that works that way. However, the person who actually coined the term was a man named Louis Hippolyte Leroy. I never heard of him.
Louis Hippolyte Leroy. Me neither.
He was the stylist for Napoleon and Josephine. And in that magnificent painting that we both know of the coronation, that was done by Delacroix, he is the one who made all the gowns.
Oh.
He's the one that made all the clothing for the whole family of Napoleon and all the gowns that you see in the painting. And he created a business empire. And he is the one who coined the term haute couture. So that was the beginning of the 19th century.
Yeah.
The very beginning of the 19th century. And it was at that time, after having been the case under Louis XIV, and of course, once Napoleon was in power, and for a few years anyway, it was relatively peaceful, that people started flocking to Paris again for fashion. So basically, from Louis XIV on, Paris has, so that is what, the middle of the 1700s, we're talking what, almost 300 years. Paris has been considered the home of fashion and creation for fashion in all of Europe, and then, of course, in now pretty much in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
What happened was that there was a man, an Englishman, named Charles Frederick Worth. Thank you very much. Who was born in 1826 and died in 1895. So he covered a fair amount of the 19th century. He succeeded this man named Leroy, who was the stylist for Napoleon. And he opened a very, very elegant fashion house near Place Vendôme.
Yeah.
So he moved closer to the opera because this is the time, this is under Napoleon III. And so this is when the opera house is being built and all of
that whole area was
developing, and Rue de la Paix and Café de la Paix and everything. And so he wanted to have it. And he is the man who invented the défilé. He's the one who said, this is what haute couture should be. You have to have live models, because apparently what they would do before then was just like those, the kind what we call the
mannequins,
the mannequins that you still see in store windows, right? You know, and they would just place them on a kind of podium, and with these new fashion, and and then women would come through and look at them. But he said, no, you have to have real live people. And so, of course, this became a thing for young women, like the saleswomen who would work in the stores. It was not for upper class women to do, but it was a little bit more respectable than being a dancer or being an actress or something like that. Now, what they looked like, I have no idea. And I doubt very much if they looked anything like this. The giraffe sticks that you see going up and down the runways today,
Yeah.
But they were indeed live, and he introduced the idea of the 2 times a year having a show, the idea of a collection. He invented the term collection of things, and he's considered to be the real father of haute couture. Now, what's interesting is that he was English, but he came to France.
Well, that's allowed.
And so, because I never think of the English as being associated with that somehow. I don't know why.
Yeah.
And then in 1911, they a union, a syndicat, which I guess really translates as union, right?
Or an organization.
An organization of official Parisian haute couture was invented and created in 1911. And the purpose of that was to stop copying. That is, there were people, even in the end of the 19th century, and it happens, of course, it still has happened in the recent past, where you get somebody who invents a concept. Imagine, like the famous suit by Chanel, whatever.
Yeah.
If it doesn't have a copyright, then you have anybody could copy it. And this was starting to happen at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th century. And so this, of course, pretty much was put on hold by World War I. But they created this organization so they could sue people to keep them from copying styles that were invented at the time. But it was already the official idea of haute couture. And then it really comes back to life after World War II.
Okay.
After World War II. And starting in 1947, they started having all of the shows again and all of the collections again. So obviously there was a period between the end of the 30s and certainly during the war when none of this was really going on. But it's really interesting to know that it's connected to a concept that goes back over 200 years, and that there's protection. There's like copyright protection for all of these people. And of course, among the first ones were Christian Dior, Yves Saint Laurent, who originally worked for him and then made his own house of fashion, Cardin,
Pierre Cardin, yeah.
who no longer, apparently his house of fashion no longer exists.
Really?
Yeah. Courrèges, whose work I remember seeing in a fashion show at the Museum of Decorative Arts in Paris, and who was very popular in the 60s and 70s with very pop art kind of clothes and high boots and mini skirts and stuff like that. I don't think anybody really talks about him anymore.
I don't know the name myself.
I really have no idea. I don't think his house of fashion exists anymore. And then you have more recent people like Christian Lacroix, whose fashion I loved, was very, very colorful, very exuberant, but who stopped a number of years ago. I don't remember now how long ago, maybe 6-7 years ago. I don't think that much before that. But he stopped creating fashion because he said he was not making any money doing haute couture anymore. And he didn't want to do multiple copies that would be ready-made to put into stores. But what he does do is he does costumes for opera and ballet and theater. So that's where he moved his style sense to. And then there's Jean-Paul Gaultier and other people like him, and then much more recent fashion designers, which includes now Italians and English, because there are quite a few even in England. And the biggest difference, really, and that's mostly since the 1960s, and that's really thanks to Yves Saint Laurent, is the idea that it was impossible to keep a fashion house going just by making these one-of-a-kind, extremely expensive pieces of clothing. And so he was the one that said, okay, we have to make very good ready-made things that are still very, very expensive, still very well put together, but are more affordable by an upper middle class kind of population. Because a gown that costs $50,000, there are not too many people can afford something like that.
Right.
But that is where most of these fashion houses went to. And I don't remember who was the first one, but the other thing was that they started making accessories and perfumes. And what I was reading yesterday makes it interesting, is that the perfume is what makes the most money.
Huh.
And each and every one of these fashion houses
has their own
perfume.
Yeah.
They go to wherever they make perfumes.
Well, I guess that's easy to wear. Anybody can wear perfume.
Yeah.
Whereas not everybody can wear those fashion dresses.
No.
I definitely couldn't. So I guess that's why, is if you want to be somewhat fashionable and you want to be with it, you buy the perfume or you buy the scarf. or you buy if they have maybe jewelry
Right.
that they make or something. Yeah,
It's
stuff
really
like that.
interesting. But see, when you think about it, you're right. I mean, it's a scarf or a perfume. It's the most accessible for everybody,
Yeah,
really. You know,
because you have to have the body for it.
you have to have the body for it.
Yeah, you can't really wear these sorts of type. I mean, I don't know. I've never tried. I've never wanted to, but I would assume it takes a certain body type, and yeah.
I mean, I assume too. I mean, for me in my mind, you have to be tall. Number one, no matter what, you have to be tall. You know.
We're both out.
We're both out. You know, it's interesting because an Italian designer that is still around, but he's no longer the person that's doing it. That I've always loved his fashion, and that's Armani. And I've always wished that I could afford Armani clothes, and that I was tall enough to wear them, because they are what they call deconstructed fashion, which means that they're not very stiff or rigid, and they flow. It's very nice. I love that concept. You know, Valentino, who originally was Spanish, I think. I'm not sure if he was Italian or Spanish. Lagerfeld, who was the head of Christian Dior for a very, very long time. I think that, I mean, the number of designers has expanded out to be more than just French designers. There are lots of people that have been brought in. Tom Ford, who was English, who came to work. I can't remember if it was for Yves Saint Laurent or Christian Dior, but you're absolutely right, and that's one of the reasons why I won't go into the stores. Because even though it's very interesting to see, I have this thing, but that's just me personally. It's like, I know I will never even try this on. I don't want to feel ridiculous, you see. So, but I love the fact that you go into those stores, Annie.
I do. And we have a great expression in France. Si le ridicule tuait, on serait tous morts. So that means if being ridiculous could kill you, we'd all be dead.
Oh, I like that.
But yes, I don't mind going into those stores. I have found that they usually welcome you, and they're very polite, and they're very nice, even though they can tell just by the way I dress that I'm not their customer.
Right.
But they're very nice. And so when we went with Patricia, everything was around. So so if you can picture what the American Embassy is.
Which is at the end of Champs-Élysées, right where the Place de la Concorde is.
Right. So bottom Champs-Élysées, Place de la Concorde, and that opens into Rue de Rivoli.
Yeah.
Boulevard Saint-Honoré is parallel to that.
Right. Behind Rue de Rivoli.
Behind Rue de Rivoli. And so this is going north a little bit.
Right.
From Rue de Rivoli. And so that's around number 380 or so. Right around those blocks, you have several. So you have, let's see. There's Chanel. Is right there, and the store is quite extraordinary. But it's not right on Rue Saint-Honoré. It's on Rue Cambon.
It's a big store, so there's like more than one floor.
You know, I think it was. It's a little fuzzy in my head, and I haven't been able to find my photos yet. So I can't remember which one was big and which one was not. But Chanel, I think, was pretty big. You also have a Gucci boutique right there. You have, let's see, who else? Louis Vuitton is right there. And you have some beautiful stuff. You also have a few of La Durée, but that's
definitely not. Right.
Pierre Hermé is also there, the macaron guy. Anyway, so it's like going to Place Vendôme. If you start at Place Vendôme and you walk towards the Champs-Élysées a little bit, you're going to find a bunch of these right along there. And it's very fun to just go in and look around. You know, there's a Burberry store there. There's a Christian Louboutin. The shoe guy is right there. Anyway, several of them. I'm sorry I don't have the list because I couldn't find my photos.
I'm sure you'll find them. I'm sure you'll find them.
But when you go, it's a really if you enjoy shopping, because it's not just Haute Couture. It's also a lot of other brands that are not quite as expensive. I mean, they're still expensive.
Well, Vuitton is pretty expensive, and Gucci is too. But it's interesting because it's accessories. So somehow people don't feel as
intimidated.
Right? Exactly. There's also at the Rue de Montaigne where I did pass. In fact, there's a Dior shop.
Right, Rue Montaigne. So this one
which is off the Champs-Élysées.
Right. So that's 48 Avenue de Montaigne is the men one, and then there's another one. There's Parfumerie at 30 to 32. Anyway, there's a bunch of them.
There's a whole bunch of them.
Yeah, but I think if you go to Rue de Saint-Honoré, if you go to Rue Montaigne, you're going to find a lot of...
Which is really, the whole area around, basically from the beginning of Champs-Élysées kind of going up. A number of years ago, when I was doing some group touring with specific kind of groups in Paris for a woman who wanted to do really things that had to do with fashion and stuff like that. I really don't remember the woman's name, but twice we went to see a woman on the Rue de Faubourg Saint-Honoré who does custom-made lingerie and who does it for people with a lot of money, but also she designed things for things like James Bond movies and stuff like that. And twice we went there. And it was very interesting for me because, I guess that's where you really know that I certainly have a sort of proletariat background. It was kind of strange, to see these little negligés that, were like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of euros, but everything was gorgeous. It was made with beautiful lace and sewn by hand, and we would sit around in this circle, and then she would sort of present all of these things, these bras and these negligés and everything like that, and it was kind of a trip, I must admit.
It's interesting. But I find the really high fashion type people, they really know how to treat everybody who walks in the door.
Now, do you think that's just here in France? I don't know. I have no idea.
I mean, so the only other experience I have with doing anything like that was in Las Vegas, in the Bellagio. They have a lot of these types of upper class type of stores in the gallery. They have a whole gallery. And I went in there too, just looking, just admiring the displays and the things. And they treat you very well too.
It must be part of their policy, I would think, because as you say, you really don't know completely, now that everybody wears jeans, and you really don't. I mean, there's maybe a way of knowing.
But sometimes at least there's places like, our friend Diane, who lived here years ago, a friend of ours, very beautiful woman, always well appointed, very, expensive, everything. She
would walk in, they would know she could buy.
Yes. And one day I remember she told me, we were talking about I was looking for a specific piece of furniture. And she mentioned a store in Toulouse where I might find it. And I happened to walk by. And so I went in and they looked at me like, who are you?
Oh, really?
What are you doing here? So I left immediately. A few days later, I went back with Diane. Completely different experience.
How interesting.
They were so nice. So this is the type of store where they really don't have their together.
Right.
Okay? Because I was the customer, she wasn't.
Right.
And I would have never bought anything there anyway, just based on the way they treated me the first time I walked in. So there are some stores that think of themselves as, we're so hoity-toity, but the real ones
don't
know how to treat their customers.
There's something about clothing. I mean, clothing, it certainly since, I would say, the middle of the 20th century, attitudes towards who can wear what has changed. So it is a fact that it doesn't matter really who you are. Anybody can buy these things because we're not talking about the pieces that cost 50,000 or 70,000. We're talking about things that cost maybe 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000.
Yeah.
And there are, in spite of whatever, there are still a fair number of people who will do that, even if it's just once or twice in their lives.
Well, like Carré, Hermès, lots of people have those, and they cost what, between 300 and 600,
and then you have it for life. I mean, so
and they're beautiful. One of these stores, I saw a display. It's beautifully lit.
Yeah.
So they have all of these carrés stretched out on the wall. and beautifully lit. And then there's a counter and you can ask to be shown any of them. They feel wonderful. They look wonderful. I mean, I don't spend that kind of money on a scarf,
Right.
but geez, they are lovely.
They are lovely.
You have to, you have to admit, they're like, it's nothing like the €5 scarves I buy when I'm in Paris, which every time I'm in Paris, it's, I buy some, but it's not the same.
It's not the same
Not the
thing.
same product.
No. And this is really, I think this is what's interesting is that in spite of everything, this is still something associated with Paris and France.
Yeah.
The whole idea of quality, just on the news today at lunchtime, talking about the economy and how things are, they're hoping that things will pick up since, we're kind of coming hopefully to the end of the pandemic at this point. And they were giving numbers about the percentage of the parts of the economy that are really important. And they were talking about the aeronautic industry because, of course, for us here in Toulouse, this is a major problem because Airbus is the biggest employer in this region. But the biggest section of economy in terms of production in France is luxury goods.
Yeah.
It's luxury goods. It's billions and billions and billions of dollars. And one of the things they were saying is that because so much of the economy of luxury goods is dependent upon export or about tourists, people coming in.
People who visit and come buy it here.
That this is a sector that they have got to do something to help because, it's really that crucial to the economy in France.
Yeah.
And it's incredible because it is true that there's a kind of almost cliche about the idea of France, Paris, fashion, luxury, but it is a reality. And it's also a reality that people think, and because it's true, that things made in France are good quality.
Yeah.
They really are.
They usually are. And it's very important when sometimes you're going to have a meeting in your life, like a business meeting or something, where you need to make an impression.
Right.
And if you have the right clothes and the right shoes and the right bag, and you wear it well and you wear it with confidence, it's going to show.
Yep.
It makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference, right?
So sometimes you just have to have this stuff. And when you're in Paris, you should enjoy the experience of going into some of these stores. And if you're like me, you just gawk, but maybe you'll buy a few items.
Maybe you'll buy a few items.
Yeah.
Although you kind of do your dreaming at that, know, and the biggest difference between these brands with these names attached to them and even the things that you buy in a store like Galeries Lafayette or Bon Marché is that these things will never be on sale.
Right.
They will not be on sale. They will just, this is the price. That's what you get.
Yeah. And sometimes apparently you find them discounted, but like at a secondhand store.
Exactly.
Right. If you're going to find them.
Yeah.
Like
we
that.
have, in fact, here in Toulouse, there are 2 or 3 secondhand stores, but there's one that deals almost only with high-end things. Mm-hmm. And I guess, they feel like, well, they can charge a fairly good price for stuff like that.
Oh, I'm sure they can.
You look at the label, and you go, hey, I've got a Dior. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I haven't ever had a Dior.
Yeah. And so we'll do a third episode about shopping in Paris. And that one will be about a list of places.
Exactly. Neighborhoods with different kinds of things.
Right. So places that listeners of the show have listed as their favorites to visit when they're in Paris. And some of them are really simple, like Monoprix,
Right. And also some suggestions about, like, if you want certain kinds of things, this is a good area to go to.
This is the neighborhood
that kind
you
of
go
thing.
to. Yeah.
Because, let's face it, the reality is that hopefully people will be able to do this because everything will be good again. But Paris is a place people come to shop.
Yeah. And for good reason. Merci, Elyse.
You are welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Au revoir. Hello, everybody. This is Elyse. I would like to thank everybody who has joined my Patreon page, which is patreon.com/ElyseArt, ELYSART. I am so very happy and thankful to all of you who have joined, and I hope to have more of you joining soon. But just for the moment, I would like to give a shout out to my very first patrons. So here we go. Thank you so much, Barbara, Lucille, Ellen, Maureen, Teresa, Roberta, Becky and Bob and Tom. I cannot tell you how thankful I am. Hope to hear from you again soon.
No new patrons this week. Boo-hoo, sad face, but I'm glad Elyse got some. And my thanks to all the patrons who have been supporting me for a long time and are making it possible for me to spend my time doing this. Patrons enjoy several rewards that you'll find listed at patreon.com/join us. Next week, I'll share 3 rewards with my patrons: 1 lunch break French, a video on how to do roundabouts in France, and some photos. Visit patreon.com/join us, Patreon, join us, no spaces or dashes, to see the different reward tiers. And thank you so much for giving back. And if you're not sure your itinerary for France is as good as it needs to be, let me review it for you. It'll cost you $50, but we'll go through the whole thing on the phone, and I will send you your personal PDF with day-by-day suggestions. Imagine how much time that will save you. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set that up and write itinerary review in the subject line. And you can also support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise. Before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. And thank you so much for those of you who do that. For the Join Us in France closed group on Facebook, I've decided to not allow posts about France reopening to visitors from the US, because these always turn into political fights about American politics, and I'm tired of it. When there's solid and official information, I'll post it, pin it to the top of the page, and turn off commenting. For this week, there is no official news, just articles that are fear-mongering and speculation, and those don't help anyone. I will post solid information when it's official, and if you post stuff like that, I will delete it. The pandemic is still under control in France. There are small upticks on certain days and certain places, but it hasn't taken off so far. We've had many small clusters, and a cluster is 3 people or more. And most of our clusters have been small. But, the testing and the tracing are getting the job done. Overall, people are cautious, yet at the same time, we can do more and more. Most people wear masks when going out into a business or anywhere closed. Masks are not mandatory for the most part, but people understand what's at stake. Masks are mandatory when you see your doctor or take public transportation or things like that. And then you have a few places where the mask is mandatory. The other day, my neighbor's teenager son passed me running at full speed, went into his house, and ran back out with a mask in his hand. He yelled out, "I can't take the bus without a mask." He had a big smile on his face. Clearly, masks aren't emasculating him. My daughter, who is 22, is really careful. Also, she's doing an internship all summer, and she has to go in the office a couple of days a week. The rest of the time, she works from home. But when she's there in person, she has to wear a mask in the office. She has to take the stairs because the elevator is locked, because elevators are seen as a possible place for contamination. And her office is on the 7th floor. The cafeteria is closed. No groups in the small conference rooms. Anyway, they are doing what they can to mitigate the risk, because when people are getting sick left and right, as they did not that long ago, nobody benefits. I think in France, we've learned how to cope with this and limit the risk. It took us a long time, and we had to suffer through very strict home confinement enforced by the police to get to this point. People are not searching for travel information nearly as much as they did last year at the same time. And I can totally tell from the Join Us in France site, which I own and run. Even when France reopens, I know people are worried about travel. They don't know what will be opened or closed. They don't know what visits are going to be like. They worry about things that will get canceled and they'll have to chase down refunds. They worry about spending their vacation wearing a mask. And what if others aren't wearing a mask? There's just too much uncertainty. That's why I think it's silly when people say we must reopen to save the economy. There's no saving the economy until the virus is under control. And even then, a large percentage of the population will return to normalcy cautiously. That's where we are in France. Theoretically, we can do just about anything we want, but we're not. At least most of us are not. We just had Fête de la Musique, which is normally a joyous evening with lots of music, and I go out and, I'm a homebody, but I go out for Fête de la Musique. There's dancing in the streets, and, some people went ahead and did that. Some cafes, especially in Paris, turned up the music loud and people started dancing. Well, the police made them turn off the music and then the crowds scattered. There was no violence or anything, but it's just killjoy. I get it. We hate what this virus is forcing us to do, but here we are. For my personal update, well, I'm mostly staying home, still. My friend Brenda, who is an author, is being a great influence on me to write a travel book. I'm about 5,000 words into it, having a great time doing it. I love saying it like it is, and even being a little bit snarky at times, because I love France. I am French. But I lived away from France too. And when you do that, when you live away from your own country, your eyes are suddenly open to some weird things that they do at home that you never noticed before. Anyway, this is going to be a best of the podcast book. It won't be about any place in particular, but more like the secret sauce to having a great time in France post-COVID. And I have no idea when it's going to be ready. I hope you enjoy it when it's out. I'll keep you posted. I planted 2 trees this week. One was a pomegranate tree from Elche in Spain. That's the city of my ancestors. It's teeny tiny, about 3 inches tall. It's a slow-growing tree, so I might eat a pomegranate in about 10 years. I would have preferred a bigger tree, but nobody had any. I picked that variety because it's from the land of my ancestors, and it has the rugged appearance of an olive tree. It stays short, and it produces the sweetest pomegranates in the world. You just have to be very patient. I ordered this tree online and I was pleasantly surprised when it arrived. Instead of packing peanuts, they used small folded cardboard, kind of like origami folds, and it worked really well. I hope to see more of this because packing peanuts are just awful. They're not recyclable and we shouldn't use them. And the second tree I planted this week is a fig tree. A few months back in the winter, I took a cutting from a neighbor's fig tree because that tree produces the best fruit. And I eat lots of that fig tree fruit every September. I tried to get it started. I followed some instructions, but I've never done this before and it just didn't work. So I gave up and I thought, okay, I'll buy a tree next fall. And then what do I see at the grocery store? Fig trees. So I got one and I planted it. We'll see what happens, Fig trees are kind of tricky because they grow big roots that like to cause trouble. This one is a smaller fig tree than most, so I'm hoping it won't cause too much trouble when it grows up to be big and strong. And I know it's not the best time of year to plant trees, but since we'll probably be home all summer, I'll pamper them and, we'll help them get through the hot days. I've been known to put umbrellas over my vegetable gardens when it gets too hot, Anyway, that's it. That's my week. And I've also been organizing a lot of photos. It seems I'm never done organizing photos, but I'll post lots of photos on social media as I find them. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd appreciate if you'd share it with someone. The easiest way to share this episode is to go to joinusinfrance.com/291 and click on the Facebook, Pinterest, or Twitter buttons. Voila, you're done. But you could also show your friends how to listen to podcasts because podcasts are really, really popular, but there's still plenty of people who've never listened to a podcast and they might feel silly asking. So help them out a little bit. Join Us in France is on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, to name just a few. Next week on the podcast, an episode with David Palachek, who's been on the show before, on visiting Corbusier sites in Paris. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week. Stay safe. wear a mask, stay inside. I can't believe we're still having to say these things. And I'll talk to you next week. Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2020 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.